the typical surveys that pollsters conduct, which are by telephone or even some that are online, we gave people messages at the end, and this is where it gets fun, and I'll show this to you towards the end of the presentation, where people were able to provide their moment-to-moment reactions to the messages as they were being played for them. So if they liked something, they hit their right arrow and move their cursor to the right. If they didn't like something, they hit their left arrow and move their cursor to the left. And we're able to aggregate those results and see in real time what words and phrases and concepts really resonate for us and kind of work for us. We surveyed 300 folks in each Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. They were all adults. We also had an oversample of 74 activists. Some of you on the phone might have been contacted by the coalition to participate in the survey, so this might seem familiar to you. And what we were looking to do was see where messages that work, we also want them to be, quote, activist approved. If you guys aren't going to say these things, then what's the point? We want stuff that that you are going to say, that your core supporters are going to say, that they're going to say to their neighbor online at the grocery store or bring up at a conversation. We want messages that kind of work in an effort to have them spread to others, other base folks and others who are more persuadable. The activist survey was in the field a little bit longer through October. The overall margin of error for the overall survey is 3.3%, but at the state-specific level, it's 5.7%. What I'm going to show you, though, is overall data based on all 3 states for these 3 cohorts of folks, base, opposition, persuadable, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then the Virginia data, that I'll show you, is broken out by an urban region and a combined of suburban and rural regions. We don't have enough sample size to be able to break out suburban by itself or rural by itself. So we wanted to look at urban populations and suburban/rural, just so that everyone's on the same page. The urban population, 53% of that is in the northern suburbs of D.C. These were defined based on how counties are designated by the census. 8% were in the Richmond area, 2% in Roanoke, and 36% were sprinkled throughout the rest of the state. The suburban-rural category, 25% of that is in Northern Virginia, 28% in the Richmond area, 22% in Roanoke, and 25% in the rest of the state. So more than half of the urban area is within the northern regions. But to the slide you have in front of you here is the interesting one as far as I'm concerned. So we want to look at people based on their attitude. So to qualify for a base, you didn't have to be a Democrat or more college educated, but you tended to be. What you did have to do was get kind of all of the questions right. We wanted people who agree with us on these issues. And this is 23% of the population across all 3 states. They strongly believe we need to protect the water supply for future generations. They do see a role in government and believe government has a responsibility to protect drinking water. And they do, more so than others, connect clean drinking water to health and believe that it is essential to our health. The opposition is only 14% of adults. This is the immovable opposition. They didn't have to be men, white, older, and more likely Republican, but they tended to be that. There were some Republicans in the base. There are some Democrats in the opposition. But at that 14%, these are folks who are more likely to believe there are other issues that are important. They do worry that spending on protecting local rivers will increase their taxes. They're much more tax sensitive than other voters. And part of their opposition stems from the fact that they already strongly trust the safety and quality of tap water and believe that the health of their local streams and rivers is particularly strong. The persuadables is everyone else. The 63% of folks across the region, they tend to be women, but not overwhelmingly so, and they are slightly younger than the other 2 groups as well. And while they agree with our base about the importance of protecting the water supply, they do show a little bit more tax sensitivity like the opposition does. Our goal here was to find messaging that was very strong with the base, that worked with the activists, and that also worked with the persuadables. And our hope was, frankly, to find something that, to a certain extent, didn't work with the opposition. Because if it works with the opposition, either we're reinforcing their worldview or I'm not quite sure what we're saying. We're just saying something that's very popular. Apple pie is very popular. Puppies are very popular. So everyone's going to like that. We want something that differentiates ourselves from the opponent's worldview. And you'll see that when we get into the messages, and it actually informs some of our key findings. So with that kind of methodology aside, let's now go through the data. And as I said, I'll show you the data where it says base persuadal and opposition, as in this slide, refers to the entire 3 state regions. And then we show you based on urban Virginia and suburban rural Virginia. So here we ask folks how they'd rate the health and quality of rivers and streams in their area. You can see overall strong ratings. The blue is the positive. The dark blue is people who rated that 8 to 10, meaning very good. Opposition, 44% have a very good rating of the health and quality of rivers and streams, much more so than the base and the persuadables. So from the standpoint of is there a problem, the opposition starts with not thinking so. That's not quite the same question, but they already believe that the rivers and streams in their area are healthy and that they are in good quality. Base, still 69% rate them positively, but much weaker so than the persuadables or opposition. Looking at this in Virginia, suburban and rural Virginia, much stronger ratings than urban Virginia when it comes to the health and quality of rivers. 46% rating 8 to 10 compared to 32% in urban Virginia there on the left. In terms of how much folks trust the safety of the drinking water where they live, again, strong trust levels across audiences, but particularly so with the opposition. 85% trust 8 to 10. They trust a great deal. 91% overall trust. Just 3% of the opposition does not trust. And so, it's not that these things are defining who these groups are, but it is significant, particularly when in assessing as to whether or not there's a problem, whether or not there needs to be an intervention, a policy intervention. The opposition already thinks that rivers and streams are healthy and of good quality, and they have stronger ratings for the trust of the safety of their drinking water. Looking again by region within Virginia, both have very strong ratings of the safety of drinking water. But you can see on the right there, the intensity in suburban and rural Virginia is a little bit stronger, 10 points, 66% rating it, and 8 to 10 in terms of how much they trust it. Does the state need to do more or less or about the same than they're doing? What you see here is the number who say much more in dark blue or somewhat more. Those numbers at the top at 84% of the base is the total who say much or somewhat more. Improving, on the left hand, we split sample this, improving the health and quality of local streams, and on the right, reducing pollution to local rivers and streams. What we're trying to get at here is, do we talk more about improving and doing something I always have trouble with this talking point. Do we want to be doing something to improve something good or reduce something bad? Typically, we find in other research that it is better to be pointing towards an aspirational goal than it is towards reducing a harm. But here, in terms of pollution is a stronger term for us, particularly with the base, 6 points there, and a little bit marginally in terms of intensity with the persuadables. But both base and persuadables want the state to be doing more, and particularly when we say reducing pollution to local rivers and streams, with the base, that's a little bit more of a goal than just improving the health and quality. So a little surprised here that the reducing of a bad thing was better than the improving of a good thing. But again, part of that could be the fact that we had such strong ratings to begin with in terms of people's ratings of the health and quality of local rivers and streams. Looking at this in Virginia here, urban residents are more likely to want the state to do more to improve the health and quality of local rivers and streams. So a little different than what we saw with the base folks on the previous slide. 75% want the state government to be doing more to improve the health and quality of local rivers and streams. When it's reducing pollution, it's just 66%. But for both regions and for both versions of this question, strong majorities here want the state to be doing more than they're currently doing. We have a series of policies, and here you see them. The dark blue is strongly favor, the light blue and the number to its right are the percent who strongly or not so strongly favor, so the total favor. The strongest policy that we found across the 3 states was this idea of strengthening the enforcement of laws that protect drinking water and our rivers and streams by ensuring regular inspections. We've done quite a bit of work on the idea of regulation in the abstract in some other contexts nationally. And one of the ways to talk about regulation in a positive for us is to talk about the enforcement of laws. So regulations can be a bad word, so to speak, particularly for conservative-leaning Republicans, but people want to enforce the laws that are on the books, and especially the two areas where support for regulations are the strongest are on regulations that protect drinking water and on regulations that protect the quality of the air. The next two policies you can see, your state or local government setting aside or creating a dedicated fund. A little bit more support for when we say setting aside money, particularly with the opposition, 77% support that dedicated fund. That plays into some of the tax sensitivity that the opposition has, so just 56% supporting that there. The next four statements I'm going to show you in terms of increasing local or state investments, and then again when we have the bottom two there are the same statements but with an increase to your taxes. And you can look on the bottom there. Majorities of base favor increasing local or state investments, even if it would increase their taxes. There is still a 15 to 20 point dip in terms of support, so even the base is tax sensitive. The persuadable still favor this when it's state investments, only a plurality favor when it's local investments, that's 48%, excuse me. But you can see the dramatically low support levels among the opposition. So without increasing their taxes, we lose the opposition. Looking at this within Virginia, so on the left, increasing state taxes, state investments, on the right, increasing local investments. Strong majorities across region support both. Urban Virginia, a 10-point increase when it's local investments compared to state investments. About the same between suburban and rural Virginia, whether it be state or local investments. When we introduce tax sensitivity to this, what do you favor or oppose this? If it increased your taxes. We still see pluralities and majorities across regions that do favor increasing state investments or increasing local investments, but those numbers and brackets are the points that we lose by introducing the concept of taxes. So in urban Virginia, much more tax sensitivity in terms of local investments, a 43-point decrease in the percent who favor. Still an 11-point margin in terms of favor versus opposed. A lot of people go to don't know. But you can see across the board here, and this is not surprising, tax sensitivity is a thing. It exists. It is an important thing, I think, to measure, and I applaud you all for kind of getting a true read, of wanting to get a true read. These aren't necessarily happy numbers for some folks, but it's important to see, one way that people like to attack these things, any sort of government program, is that it is going to increase taxes. And so it's important to kind of get a read on who those tax-sensitive voters are. And in urban Virginia, particularly around local investments, tax sensitivity is a thing. We also tested these kind of core value statements. And the ones that rise to the top here, particularly for the base, are this idea of protecting the water supply, having access to clean and safe drinking water, this notion of having a moral responsibility to future generations. And this is something, for what it's worth, that we have tested in environmental work, whether it be climate, whether it be public lands, or whether it be clean water. This moral component, this responsibility to future generations, is a very, very strong value for our terrain, and something that particularly women and millennials really respond to. 98% of the base in our sample rated that an 8 to 10 on a 0 to 10 scale, meaning that they strongly agree with that statement. And even 55% of the opposition does believe that we have a moral responsibility to future generations. Everyone needs to take steps to reduce the pollution to our rivers and streams, including businesses and farmers. We tested this kind of as a paired statement that you'll see in a couple slides next to kind of more an individual sense of responsibility. And people do really respond to this notion that everyone does need to do their parts. Also strong support for this notion that clean water is essential to our economic future. And with our base, even 96% agree with that. 71% of our persuadable strongly agree with that as well. The economic frame, though, is not where we win this debate, and I'll show that to you in a little bit. We win this debate when we're talking about health. You are all environmental organizations, and if we are going to try to make an argument that the reason that you need to protect clean water or protect the water supply or protect rivers and streams is for the economy, you're going to be going up against other folks, other organizations, other entities that are things like the Chamber of Commerce or local businesses. And guess who the everyday voter is going to trust more when it comes to what's best for the economy? It's not the organizations that are dedicated to protecting water supply. It's those that are dedicated to making a profit. So while, yes, people do believe that clean water is essential to our economic future, it is important for us to fight this battle on grounds that we own, which is health and safety and drinking water, and this kind of moral responsibility for future generations. And I'll get to that in a couple of slides. That's been my disclaimer when we see that there is that strong rating about the economic domain. Other places other statements that we tested, here, the moral responsibility, and you'll see this in a couple slides. The previous slide said clean and safe drinking water. Here we say protect the water we drink. Here it's our drinking water. You'll see that in a couple of slides. The role for government has a responsibility to provide clean and safe drinking water is that second line, and the second from the bottom, clean and safe drinking water, and to keep our rivers and streams clean. Very strong support for both statements with our base and persuadable, so we start to alienate the opposition a little bit when we expand what the role of government should be beyond drinking water and also to keep our rivers and streams clean. And then at the bottom there, we need policies that recognize that clean water is essential to our health. And in the middle, drinking water is essential to our health. Both very, very strong with our base and persuadables, less so than our opposition, but it's really in the messaging frame where you see the value of connecting drinking water and clean water and rivers and streams to a health value as opposed to an economic value. I want to show you some of these language tests that we did, and I'll show you these based on base persuadable opposition and then also in the Virginia breaks that you've seen. And there's one slide I'll get to in a minute where it's awkward to be a pollster and not have a good explanation for it, but I'll get to that in a moment. So here on the left, the blue bars are the reactions to the statement on the left in blue. We have a moral responsibility to future generations to restore and protect our drinking water. Half the sample heard that. The other half heard the statement in orange. We have a moral responsibility to future generations to restore and protect the water we drink. What I'm looking for in these slides when we look at base persuadable opposition is, one, how do they perform with the base and the persuadable? Are they strong? Do they find agreement? Is there one that's particularly stronger with the base or the persuadables? And then is there one where we get agreement across the board, but we happen to have the added benefit of bothering the opposition? And that's where I'm looking for that to be able to see, does it differentiate, does it make what we're saying persuadable and persuasive to people who kind of have cross currents and believe some of what our base believes and believe some of what our opposition believes. So here, our drinking water is very strong with our base. 92% agree with that. 50% rated at 10 out of 10. But when we say the water that we drink, we get a 21-point increase in intensity with our base within the margin of error in terms of our persuadables. So that, to me, is an important finding that the water we drink is a little bit more evocative and creating an image for people. We had a long talk before this project about the drinking water and the water we drink. What's the difference? I would posit that the water we drink kind of helps paint a picture for people and helps make this a little bit closer to home than just drinking water in the abstract. However, when we look at it, based in Virginia, we get on the left, the urban folks, they prefer drinking water. The suburban rural folks, they prefer the water that we drink. And those differences are outside the margin of error. So while my conclusion for the region is, for the three states, is to say the water that we drink because it's more evocative with our base, clearly here the water we drink in suburban rural areas is a little stronger, and saying our drinking water in urban Virginia is a little bit stronger. Here we have saying restore and protect. We need to restore and protect in blue rivers and streams so that people can spend time exploring and connecting with nature. The same thing on the right, and we were just saying protect. And this is one thing that as we were devising the survey, we kind of inadvertently were sometimes saying restore and protect, sometimes saying restore, sometimes saying protect. We want to just get a sense. Does it make sense for us to be saying restore and protect versus protect? So you can see that for both our base and our persuadables, strong agreement on these two statements. But when we say restore and protect, we bother the opposition. And that's because restoring and protecting, while they are somewhat synonymous, they also might have different implications in terms of what we need to be doing vis-a-vis policy. So restoring, restoration, cleaning something up, making something better, protecting, protecting moving forward and making sure that there's no harm done to that. Restoring and protecting is a little bit, allows for a broader policy agenda, and it helps alienate our opposition. It's stronger with our persuadables there by 11 points. Protecting very, very strong with our base, but restore and protecting still very strong, and it helps bring along the persuadables. So we believe that it's better to say restore and protect. It's good with our persuadables. It's still strong with our base, and it helps persuade the persuadables because it's a little bit alienating to the opposition. When we look at in Virginia, the big difference is within suburban rural Virginia. There's a little bit more support for the idea of protecting. In urban Virginia, restoring and protecting does have a good impact in the urban areas. So again, a big difference here between the urban areas where restoring and protecting, that broader agenda is stronger, but protecting is stronger by itself in suburban and rural Virginia. I'm going to come back to this data in a moment because I have another slide that just seems confusing when you put all these things together. Here we have government is responsible to provide clean, yes.
Sorry, just a quick question. I think this is probably a good question to answer right now, and I think we had it on one of the other polling presentations. Can you just go back over the definition of the urban Virginia group and the suburban rural Virginia group and just define that a little bit better?
Sure. So what I have in front of me is we divide Virginia into 4 regions, and I can provide, I don't unfortunately have this in front of me, the county breakdown of each of these, but we have northern, Richmond, Roanoke, and then the rest of the state. The urban area, 53% of the urban area is in the northern region, 8% of it is in Richmond, 2% in Roanoke, so just a little bit, and then 36% in the rest of the state. The suburban rural region, 25% of that is in the northern region, 28% in Richmond, 22% in Roanoke, and 25% in the rest of the state. I realize that's kind of vague, so what I recommend is let me put together a spreadsheet that outlines what counties are considered urban, what counties are considered suburban rural. Certainly there's a lot of counties, and it would be a little bit not efficient to go over each individual one, but the bottom line is the urban region, half of that is northern Virginia, and the suburban rural region is fairly well spread out across the state.
Great,
Would Hampton Roads be the rest of the state?
Sorry?
Would Hampton Roads be in the rest of the state?
I believe so, yes, but I'd have to double check that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So here we have government responsibility. So in the orange we add, so yes, government's responsibility to provide clean and safe drinking water. The base, the persuadables, and even the opposition agrees with that. When we add this notion of keeping our rivers and streams clean, we still are very strong with the base, still strong with the persuadables at 67%, although we lose a little bit of intensity. But we start losing the opposition. And again, that's because, remember, this opposition already thinks that already has a strong rating for rivers and streams, so they don't see necessarily the need for that. And they are a little tax sensitive and have lower levels of support for the policy agenda that we have. But we can say keep our rivers and streams clean because it's very strong with our base and our persuadables. Now here's where I'm just kind of perplexed, because on the left here, this surprises me, the fact that urban has a stronger rating when we don't say keep our rivers and streams. The urban region has a weaker rating, as you saw, in terms of the health of our rivers. They have a little bit less trust in the quality of the drinking water. They support improving health, the health and quality of rivers and streams at higher levels than suburban and rural, more likely to agree that we need to restore and protect. Yet, when we add this keep our rivers and streams clean to them, the intensity there really drops off. Now, both of these, I mean, 82 and 62% agree are still very, very strong numbers. I'm baffled. I don't have a good explanation for why the urban region is a little lower when we add keep our rivers and streams clean. The other places in the data would suggest that they would kind of be on par here. You know, I'm tempted to say some of this is maybe a little bit of statistical noise getting into small sample sizes. It is slightly inconsistent with the other data that we have. So that's not the best takeaway, I'll totally admit that, but it is what it is. That said, you still have, like I said, 82% agreeing with responsibility to provide clean and safe drinking water, and 62% agreeing when we add to keep our rivers and streams clean. And that's, both of those are still larger than the opposition, and particularly the opposition here in orange, that's 41%. Even in urban Virginia, it's 21 points above that. So take that with a grain of salt. It's not the best thing for a pollster to say, but that's what the data shows. We also tested clean water versus drinking water. Here with the base drinking water, much stronger in terms of intensity than clean water. So again, clean water as a concept, very, very important to people, 70% are persuadables, but drinking water getting a little closer to home, personalizing a little bit more, talking about, you know, we tested, as you saw earlier, drinking water and the water that we drink. Clean water strong, drinking water stronger, the water that we drink strongest. Here, these things based on the same two questions, urban and suburban Virginia, very strong for both. Clean water is a stronger term, though, a little bit for urban residents. And then I alluded to this, these are not language tests, but two kind of ways to talk about responsibility. So in the blue, this kind of collective, aspirational, inclusive assertion of responsibility. Everyone needs to take steps to reduce the pollution to our rivers and streams, including businesses and farmers. I mean, everyone agrees with this. 97% of the base, 57% of our opposition agrees with this too. And then this kind of more individual notion, I should not have to do more than others when others are not doing their share. So we're kind of looking at kind of different ways to talk about this. It is better to talk about everyone needing to take steps, including businesses and farmers, and not a tremendous amount of difference between urban Virginia and suburban and rural Virginia as well. So with those being the language tests, I want to show for you the messages that we dial. I'm not going to show all of them to you. I'm just going to show the opposition message, and then I'll do that quickly, and then I'll show you the top 3 testing messages that we had, and I'm going to show you them based on base persuadable opposition, and I'll explain why in a moment, but just that everyone knows what happened for those of you who weren't in the activist sample. Folks listened to a recording of the message, and what you see on the right there is what they saw. So they played the message, and that little green button, they could click on that with their mouse and move it to the right if what they heard they liked, move it to the left if they didn't like what they were hearing. The reason I'm going to show you these messages based on base persuasion opposition is because the ratings aren't dramatically different based on urban, suburban, and rural. The suburban and rural areas, slightly stronger ratings in terms of their average dial rating, which I'll sometimes refer to as their unconscious rating. So that's the average score while they were dialing from beginning to end. And then we asked them a follow-up question, how convincing on a scale of 0 to 100 do you find this message? And slightly stronger ratings with the suburban and rural ratings as well here, but not dramatically different. These are still within the margin of error, 5.7 points, or right outside of the margin of error. See that most of our messages beat the opposition message. The only message that kind of didn't do that well was we tried kind of a bank shot for what I thought was a great message, cut the crap. But sometimes trying humor in a dial survey doesn't necessarily work. It wasn't as strong. Strong convincing ratings in the suburban and rural region, but I'm just going to play for you these top 3. The health focus, which was by far our strongest message, community and water as human experience, which have some similar themes. You can see the economy-focused message, which I'm not going to play for you, still rated strong, but much less so than the health focus. But before I get into those, let me play for you the opposition message so you can see how well that one dials. And it's important to see because you can see how the persuadables still agree with a lot of the notions that this kind of generic opposition would have as well. Make sure we're off mute, and I'll play this for you. I won't play this for you. Hang on one second. Did my speaker turn off? My speaker turned off. There we go. Let's try this again. So as you'll go, the lines represent, the blue line is the base, the red is the opposition, the green is the persuadable, the orange is the activist. Those numbers in parentheses are the average dial rating for those audiences in here. So you can see the persuadable is not too far off from the opposition. Let's try this again.
We all love our families and want a better world for our children. But some people want to increase taxes and create burdensome regulations around water that will hurt middle-class families and their children. We need to focus on creating good-paying jobs, attracting new businesses, and growing our economy. Raising taxes right now for government water projects would set us back. It would hurt our local economy, cut jobs, and make it harder for people to make ends meet. We need to create jobs and encourage new businesses, not raise taxes on hardworking families to pay for more government spending.
You can see here, our activists are like, nope, 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 I don't like this at all. And, you know, when we talk about the increasing taxes and creating burdensome regulations, everyone kind of dials down. So what's scary for me here is that the persuadables are dialing positively here. They dial up around the notion of creating good-paying jobs, encouraging new businesses. We need to create jobs and encourage new businesses, not raise taxes on hardworking families to pay for more government spending. They are very much cross-pressured, and that was the case in Virginia as well. So this was these were the dial ratings. Here's the follow-up question: how convincing did you find the message? So the dark red is the percentage saying 100 out of 100. The numbers next to the pink bar is the total rating at 80 to 100. So these are our convincing ratings. You can see the opposition loved this message, 59%. Persuadables, the activists, I don't know who that 1% is who gave it 100. You know, every now and then someone enters the wrong number. But the activists completely reject this message after they've heard it. A little bit stronger in the suburban rural region, much less so in the urban, but still these are very, very weak ratings in Virginia. And as I mentioned, the persuadables here, it's important to know that they have these cross pressures on taxes and creating good paying jobs, which is one of the reasons why it is important for us to fight this on terrain where we don't have cross pressures, where we win. And that is our next message, which focuses on people's health.
Our family's health matters, and clean water is essential to our health. When old infrastructure and poor planning lets dangerous chemicals like lead into the water that our children drink, we need new solutions. Thankfully, we know what works. Through smart planning and development, we can prevent pollution from reaching our rivers and streams, keeping them clean and our drinking water safe. We must make water a priority because our health is a priority. We must take the necessary steps to ensure that the water we use to clean our dishes and that our children use to brush their teeth is safe.
So now we tried a couple things here. One, what was important for us was to connect immediately with a core value. As my boss, Linda, likes to say, we are no longer in a 30-second soundbite world, we're in a 10-second soundbite world. And if you don't grab people quickly, you've lost them. And so what's important here is we start with a shared value. Our family's health matters and clean water is essential to our health. You saw in the data earlier, that was something that people agreed with. We get a very, very quick lift off here. And then we pivot, and once we've done that and we're kind of into the shared value space where we have people, when we pivot to our solutions, we know it works. Smart planning and development. We can prevent pollution from reaching our rivers and streams. Our persuadables are dialing up throughout the entire policy agenda here. When we say we must make water a priority because our health is a priority, they're dialing up at that. So when we frame this about health, the persuadables, the people who are persuadable on this issue, they are dialing up for our policy solutions as well. Here you can see their convincing ratings after the fact. Very strong with our base and our persuadables. Our activists love this message. Much stronger with our Virginia residents compared to the opposition statement. The opposition, not so much. Only 27% of folks find this convincing. We need solutions, as I mentioned, that strong language with our base and our persuadables. Preventing pollution from reaching our rivers and streams is strong with our base. The one thing that does fall short here, finding less dangerous chemicals like lead in the water that our children drink. We need new solutions. They plateau. They don't really dial down. And honestly, I mean, some of this stuff is kind of hard to get people to dial down on. And so if the opposition is plateauing, it is technically falling short, but I'll look at that as a win. It's kind of hard to be against clean drinking water. But here you can see, I'll go back to that part in the slide, but that's where they kind of plateau there. But at the end, we're talking about solutions. Persuadables and our base and our activists are all dialing up. The next message I'll play for you, this was the second strongest one, very strong with our base and our persuadables, very, very strong with our activists as well. It's called community.
We all want to live in the best places for our family. Ensuring that clean water flows through our rivers and streams is an important part of making our community a place we are proud to call home. Clean drinking water is essential, and clean rivers and streams provide places for people to enjoy the great outdoors. We need water to fight fires and grow food, and clean water contributes to a greater quality of life. We can preserve what makes our community great for our children and grandchildren if we invest in protecting our water supply and preventing pollution in our rivers and streams.
So you can see here again, strong takeoff with all groups, particularly our activists and our base. Again, we're starting here with this, we're trying to start with a shared value and get that quick takeoff, and we do. We want to live in the best place. Clean water flows through our rivers and streams is an important part, making our community a place we are proud to call home. We've tried that concept in a variety of environmental projects, including this one, and it does help. Kind of localizing these issues is somewhat helpful for us, and you can see them throughout the rest of this. When we're talking about it, once again, when we're talking about our policy agenda, we get our persuadables to dial up throughout. Here is the convincing ratings, a little bit weaker with our persuadables. This one's 44% compared to 49% on the health focus. A little bit weaker with our activists too, frankly, 47% here compared to 62% on the health focus message. Very, very strong with our base. I think this was the strongest message with our base, 81% here, rating this convincing compared to 68% on the health. As I mentioned, it has that quick takeoff rating. That language on solutions helps to alienate the opposition, which is a challenging thing to do in this issue environment. And then these strong ratings for clean water are, we test a variety of things: enjoying the outdoors, providing a quality of life, making community a place proud to call home. These were strong kind of concepts for people. You'll see in the next one that we tried some other stabs at language as well, and these were some of the stronger ones. I'm kind of boiling it down simply. This next message that I'll play for you, this one was strong. We could have made this one stronger in retrospect, and I'll get to that in a moment. But sometimes you have to learn these things after the fact. This one we called Water as Human Experience, really trying to kind of use evocative language here. Which was successful, but because we kind of put off the shared value towards the middle of the statement, it was not as strong as our top two messages, health and community.
Every day, water connects each of us to others in our lives. It fills the pools that bring children relief on a hot summer day. It runs through the rivers people enjoy by fishing or boating. It fills our glasses and is in our morning coffee and the beer or glass of wine we may enjoy with dinner. Without water, there is no life. We must protect the water around us and keep our water safe and clean, which means building projects to restore and protect our local rivers and streams, because water brings us together and is central to life.
So you can see it tests well, but it's not as quick of a liftoff. I mean, the real statement here is that without water, there is no life. And, that works with our base and our activists. But we had, if we could have done this one over again, we might have maybe used fewer examples of trying to make that connection. We tried the pools, we tried the rivers, it fills our glasses, and several types of glasses, coffee and something with dinner. People got it, right? They understand. They're dialing up throughout of this, but, in that 10-second world, we need to get to the point here a little bit more quickly. People do idea this. There is this strong notion about this connection that we're making here, and that does really resonate across of these different audiences, but it did have a little bit of a slower takeoff. Here, the convincing rating, strong with the base and persuadable, a little bit weaker than our top message. People do dial up with the illustrations of connection, the glasses, as I mentioned, but it is just a little bit too much for folks, or too many examples. We could have, as I mentioned, made our point a little bit stronger. The calls to protect the water around us were very strong with both our base and our persuadables. You can see that it's sort of the middle to the right, right over here, where the persuadables start dialing up and our base and our activists are dialing up. So again, when we're making these three frames are helpful in the sense that they lay a strong foundation for us to then bring in our policy agenda and talk about the different changes that we have to make. The way we define a good message isn't just in how it performs in terms of how convincing people find it. We also want to know, does it impact perception? Do these messages help move people? And one of the ways that we wanted to test to see how these things do was, how interested are you in joining together with other people in your community to take action to restore and protect the health and quality of local rivers and streams in your area? Does this motivate people to want to join together with others? Now, interest and excitement in joining is not quite the same as their likelihood of actually taking action, but it is a strong correlate. So you can see with our base and our persuadables, the lighter blue are those who move towards being more interested after messaging. The pink are those who move away towards being interested or being less interested. And for both our base and persuadables, first of all, the percent who are consistently interested, both pre and post, are stronger than our opposition, 47% of our base, 33% of our persuadables. But we do move both the base and the persuadables towards wanting to join together with others to take action. When we look specifically in Virginia, less movement in urban Virginia, only 5 points between towards being interested and away from being interested and being less interested. 36% in urban Virginia, consistently interested throughout the survey. The movement really is in suburban and the rural areas. You can see those two groups, the two boxes on the right there, the percentage who were solidly interested in joining together, African Americans, Democratic men, Democrats in general, and women were much more likely than others to be interested both pre and post messaging. In terms of groups that moved towards being interested, I'm a little surprised to see Republicans here, younger Republicans at 40%, those under 50 at 30%, and parents as well here at 37%. So bottom line, these messages move people towards being interested in taking action with others. The ones that were the strongest in doing that were the health message. That's what the regression analysis that we conducted worked. And a little bit more impact in suburban and rural Virginia than in the urban areas. Lastly, just one other thing that before I go on to kind of our final words to use and lose, we tested a variety of messengers. And I think this data is a little bit more interesting when we look at by base, persuadable, and opposition. Water quality scientists, environmental organizations, very, very strong with base voters. Public health nurses and nurses are strong with everyone. They have been the strongest messengers. People trust nurses and have trusted them. I think the Gallup polling, when they test trust in professions, has shown nurses at the top for years now. Very, very strong across audiences. Environmental organizations strong with our base, much less strong with the opposition compared to nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit less strong with our base as well. Elected leaders, People don't trust them. I know that's a surprise to everyone, but elected leaders or elected representatives, as we put them, much lower trust levels, particularly around from our base and our opposition, who are more likely to be partisans. And so you can make of that what you will. People are kind of, the partisan leaning, just being fed up with politics coming through in there as well. So in summary, in terms of the words to use and words to lose, and some of this, we see a little bit of difference when it comes to Virginia. In general, preventing pollution is better than reducing pollution. It does help generate a little bit more urgency, and it helps kind of provide a greater space for our policy agenda, as does restoring and protect rather than protect by itself, although certainly you saw that protect by itself was better in the suburban and rural areas of Virginia. But restoring and protecting, it has a broader framework from where we can talk about solutions and policies, and it does help to alienate the opposition. Setting aside money stronger than a dedicated fund, which trips up some of the tax sensitivity that we see. The water that we drink, better than drinking water. I mentioned that because it's a little bit more evocative and helps kind of create a visual for people. Both are stronger than the idea of clean water in the abstract. So if we're going to be talking about clean water, let's talk about drinking water. Let's talk about the water that we drink. Bring it home. Bring it personal for people. As I mentioned earlier, water is essential for our health as opposed to our economy. Health is the values orientation that we win on. The economy is contested space. We are competing with others who are better validators when it comes to the economy. The health is where we need to be arguing and winning this and making this an issue about health as opposed to the economy. Solutions as opposed to problems. People are solutions oriented, and it also does help to alienate our opposition. And this last one was that kind of notion about being positive and collective. Everyone needs to take steps to reduce pollution as opposed to others are not doing enough. You saw the drastic difference between groups when we asked those two questions. So I'll stop there. I know that's a lot of data, and I will open it up to Q&A. Kristen, I can't see the chat box, so if there's questions there, by all means, please read them out to me if you could.
Yeah, we got some great questions. Thank you for that, Jonathan. So one question we had was, how do our base and opposition percentages compare to other movements?
That's a great question. So I would say your base is slightly bigger. Typically when we do this, and there's no magic formula for creating the base. It differs based on the issue as you can imagine. But we typically see a base between 15 and 20%. You have 23% of adults who are base. And we usually see an opposition around what you have, which is 14%. There are some issues. The most recent one that I can think of where the base was even larger than this was on prescription drugs. I think we, in a project that we did on prescription drug reform and kind of reducing prices to prescription drugs, we had 28-29% of our sample qualify as base. But we're in part we're looking to kind of narrowly define these groups. We're not, I would think it would be a mistake to assume that a 50% majority of, even though you get majority support on all these policies, we're really looking for that strong, committed group of supporters and trying to isolate that strong, committed, and movable opposition that we can't move. So I guess that's a long-winded answer, but in general, your base is larger than we typically see, though I've seen some projects where it's larger, and your opposition is about the same.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick? Was there any difference in between the states as far as the percentage of base and persuadables and opposition?
Not dramatically, a little bit, but at the margins. The state is not really driving. The people's attitudes are not related to where they live, and they're not dramatically related. I know you see it here in some of the kind of blurring slides between urban and suburban and rural. It's not one of the driving factors behind who gets into base and who gets into opposition. Partisanship helps explain base, age, race, and gender a little bit as well, but not so much by state or geography.
This is Monica. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Monica.
I just have a question, and I don't know if you can answer this because I know that this took place months and months and months ago. But out of curiosity, in your recent, if you have any recent projects, have you noticed any difference in opposition and pro responses? Because given the political climate, I'm just wondering if people are digging in more, and if some of this research and results might end up being moot down the road as people are digging into their positions and opposition or pro more and more. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm just curious.
You are, and it's a very good question. And I mean, the most honest answer is I don't have apples to apples data to compare. So, I mean, the honest truth is I don't know, but I do have some good guesses. And I think you are right that the opposition and our base are digging in a little bit, to be sure. What I think this issue has that helps it, though, in a Trump world is the fact that it is such a local issue and can be kind of litigated on the local issue. Trust in government is much stronger at the local level than it is at the national level. And to the extent that you can be looking for local solutions and state-based solutions, you are on safer terrain and the ground is still fertile for change relative to things at the national level. I did do some work recently that investigated that kind of, the hierarchy of where change can happen, and that dynamic is still holding solid, that people do have more faith in their state and local government than they do have national government. I think, as I've mentioned to Chris offline, the biggest challenge that you all face is for those activists and base who are committed to your perspective, it's just so friggin' overwhelming right now, the magnitude of insanity that's going on here in D.C. and with this administration. And so that is something that every organization, environmental or otherwise, is just contending with. You might be a committed environmental activist, but you certainly care about all the other things that are under attack by this administration. And so that sense of being overwhelmed, I think, is a challenge that everyone is facing right now. However, like I said, because you are a local, this is an issue that can be dealt with on the local and state level that does provide a better terrain for us. And my gut tells me that this data is not dramatically different now than it was in September.
Thank you.
So I know that it's 3 o'clock right now, and we have a bunch of other questions still in the queue. So I'm going to try and do a couple more, and then if it's okay with everybody else, I can follow up with Jonathan on these questions and then circle back to everybody that had the questions and give you guys your answers, if that works. One question
and I'm
we
happy
had.
to stay on the too.
Okay, great. One of the questions we had was in relation to return on investments for case studies. I don't know if Julie's still on the phone and if she wanted to expand on that question.
Hi, yeah, it was in regard to the slide about the taxes, and I was just wondering if return on investment messages were stronger. Of course, then you moved on to saying that environmentalists were not the right one to talk about the economy, but if I'm thinking more on like stormwater, if the home builders or the Department of Transportation were talking about return on investment and incorporating green infrastructure, is that a valid approach?
I do. I don't know if someone else want to respond to that. I can certainly give my 2 cents from the data. So I think that you can talk about the return on investment, but you should talk about it on the terrain where we're stronger, that the benefits are going to be in terms of people's health, the quality of drinking water, etc. And so I think that you can still talk about the benefits of smarter policy in terms of its return on investment, but you're going to get people to agree with us first if we talk about why we need to do this because clean drinking water is important for our health, and this policy solution has a strong return on investment. And to the extent that you can link that to positive health outcomes, I would suggest that. It's not that you abandon talking about the issue in an economic context. It's that you lead with the value terrain that we're strongest on, which is connecting it to health and to connecting it to the people's use in terms of clean drinking water and the water we drink, et cetera. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Great. And then I think I know the answer to this question, but just in case, Jonathan, CBS was asking if we tested restore language by itself. So I know we tested restore and protect and then protect by itself, but I don't believe that we just tested the word restore and not protect with it.
I think that's correct. I don't think that we did. I think it was just the restore and protect versus protect.
And then, Hedrick, you had a couple of questions in the queue. One of them related to how unique the data was in Virginia versus Pennsylvania and Maryland, I think related specifically to urban areas. Did you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I guess just sort of curious, comparing, but you may have already answered it, Jonathan, in terms of there wasn't any meaningful difference between what you found in Virginia with urban areas compared to Maryland and Pennsylvania. Is that right, or was there something different about Virginia or different about one of the other states when it comes to urban areas?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, nothing immediately strikes me. I mean, I think that one of the things we found was in Pennsylvania, the urban areas really looked a little bit more like the base than they did in Maryland or in Virginia. I mean, I think I'd have to go back and look. I don't know that there. I don't. My conclusion, without kind of looking through very, very specific places where urban was different than suburban and rural overall, is that being in an urban area does not help predict one's attitude on these things more so than being in a suburban or a rural area. And we still see across the 3 states strong support for the policy agenda in the suburban and rural area, and even in some cases stronger support in the suburban and rural areas for things like creating a dedicated fee or setting aside money. But nothing that kind of rises to the category of a pattern between the two, if that makes sense.
That's good, and you would know it. Don't worry about going back. I mean, you swam in the data long enough that if there was something dramatically different in one of those 3 state/commonwealths, you would have known about it. And Shante, don't worry about my other question. It was just sort of a setup question.
Okay. So then the last question that I have in the queue is from Anne. She was curious about if you could explain why the faith community was so low in their credibility rating, just above elected officials.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is that while people, for one thing, people of faith would probably raise to the top, but it just doesn't seem like a natural leader when it comes to rivers and streams as an issue. So to back up for a moment, for context, we did, or just to kind of elaborate, if you will, we did some work with Eco-America nationally about talking about climate change, and we included an oversample of people of faith, and we had specific messages directed for the faith community. And they were very, very strong with people of faith. So as a kind of a frame for talking about the issue, they were weaker than some of these other shared values when it comes to kind of the idea of health and reducing pollution and protecting the air we breathe and the water that we drink. And I think part of it is just they're seen as a little bit more removed from the issue. It doesn't make them bad folks are bad messengers. They're just a little bit more removed. And so for faith communities, I would posit that church and faith leaders are strong messengers on these things. But when it just comes to people kind of thinking about it in this list, it is a little bit more removed. And you do have the sample of people that are not of faith, that are not people of faith as well.
Great, thank you for that. And so are there any others that had questions that they did not include in the text box? All right, great. Well, thank you all so much for calling in today. This presentation was recorded, so we will be able to provide a link to this recording to anyone. So if you are interested, please just shoot me, Kristen Riley, an email, and I will forward that link to you, and feel free to spread it among your members and anyone else that you're working with that would be interested. And if you're interested in any of the other polling results that we had, we do have links to those webinars as well, so just let me know. And thank you again, Jonathan, for all of your hard work. I don't know if Michael is still on the phone from Spitfire, but he also help participate in this. So thank you guys so much for everything, and we look
Hey,
forward
Kristen?
to working on this in the future. Yeah.
Kristen, I have one quick question. Do we have a crosstabs for Virginia available?
We do, yeah. And I think, sorry, is that Bill?
Yeah,
Okay, great. I'll add you to my list of people to send that to.
that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you
all.
all.